Most people think their biggest problems come from bad luck, difficult circumstances, or other people. But what if the real reason many lives drift in the wrong direction is something far simpler and far more uncomfortable? Imagine waking up one day and realizing that years of your life have quietly slipped away. Not because you didn't work hard, but because you never stopped long enough to understand your own decisions. It happens to more people than you think. In today's story, you'll meet a man who believed his future was already ruined. Too many bad choices, too many regrets, too many doors already closed. By all appearances, his life was heading in one direction, and it wasn't a good one. But everything began to change because of one surprisingly simple habit. A habit that takes only 10 quiet minutes a day, yet has the power to reshape the way a person thinks, reacts, and chooses. No expensive courses, no complicated life system. Just a notebook, a few honest questions, and the courage to face the truth. And what happened next might challenge everything you believe about personal transformation. Because sometimes the most powerful way to move forward is to stop. Stay with this story until the end, because what this man discovered might quietly change the direction of your life too. Most people move through life the way a train moves along a track. Steady, automatic, rarely questioning where it's actually going. Morning alarms ring, routines begin, and the day unfolds almost by memory rather than intention. Decisions are made quickly, often without reflection, just another step in a familiar pattern. And before anyone realizes it, weeks turn into months, and months quietly slip into years. Somewhere along the way, life stops being something they guide and becomes something that simply happens to them. If you looked closely at their days, you'd notice something interesting. They're busy, constantly moving, constantly doing something. But movement isn't always the same as progress, and activity doesn't guarantee direction. Many people repeat the same choices, the same reactions, the same habits. It's like walking in circles inside a fog, convinced you're traveling somewhere new. Sometimes the pattern begins with small decisions that feel harmless. Skipping a difficult conversation, delaying an important goal, choosing comfort over growth. Nothing dramatic at first, just tiny compromises here and there. But those small choices have a strange way of stacking up quietly over time, and eventually, they build a life that feels strangely unfamiliar. Years later, people often look around and ask themselves a troubling question. How did I end up here? The job wasn't the dream they once imagined. Relationships feel distant, goals feel forgotten, and motivation feels thinner than it used to be. And yet, the path that led there was walked one normal day at a time. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never pause long enough to see. Life rarely collapses all at once. It drifts slowly, almost invisibly. One repeated mistake becomes a habit. One ignored lesson becomes a pattern. And patterns, when left unexamined, quietly shape entire futures. Think about a typical evening for many people. They come home tired, scroll through their phones, watch something, distract themselves. The day ends without a single moment spent asking a powerful question. What did I learn today? Or, what could I have done differently? Without those questions, tomorrow often looks suspiciously like yesterday. And so the cycle continues, day after day, decision after decision. Not because people are weak or incapable, but because no one ever taught them the importance of stopping. Stopping long enough to examine their own actions and understand their direction. Without that pause, life becomes a loop that's surprisingly hard to escape. Yet every now and then, hidden inside this quiet cycle, there is someone whose story unfolds differently. Someone who suddenly realizes something isn't right. Someone who begins to question the pattern instead of blindly following it. And interestingly enough, that realization rarely comes during comfort. It usually begins with a man whose life has already started to fall apart. Somewhere in a quiet corner of the world lived a man who often felt like life had already passed its final judgment on him. From the outside, he looked ordinary, just another face moving through crowded streets and long workdays. But inside, his thoughts were heavy, weighed down by the silent echo of past decisions. If someone had asked him how things went wrong, he probably wouldn't know where to begin, because the truth was, it hadn't been one mistake, but many. Years earlier, his life had looked very different. He had plans, ideas, that restless kind of hope young people carry in their chest. But somewhere along the road, impatience began guiding his choices. Shortcuts looked easier than discipline. Quick gains seemed better than slow growth. At the time, every decision felt reasonable, until time revealed the bill. One opportunity slipped away because he waited too long to act. Another disappeared because he reacted in anger instead of patience. Money came and went through careless spending and risky decisions. Relationships slowly cracked under the weight of pride and stubbornness. Piece by piece, the life he once imagined quietly collapsed. Now his days felt strangely smaller than they used to. He woke up already tired, not just physically but mentally. There was always that quiet voice reminding him of what could have been. Every regret replayed itself like an old movie he couldn't turn off. And over time, those memories built a heavy belief inside him. He began to think that maybe his future had already been decided. Maybe some people were simply meant to fall behind. Maybe success belonged to those who didn't make the mistakes he had made. The more he repeated that story in his mind, the more convincing it sounded. And slowly, hope began fading from his daily thoughts. The strange thing about regret is that it doesn't just live in the past. It follows people quietly through their present. It appears in small hesitations, in lost confidence, in decisions avoided out of fear. Even when new opportunities appear, regret whispers dangerous words. You'll probably ruin this one too. And so the man walked through life carrying something invisible but powerful. Not chains, not obstacles, but the weight of his own history. Every wrong turn felt like proof that he couldn't change. Every failure reinforced the story that his best years were already behind him. But deep down, something inside him wasn't entirely silent, because sometimes, even in a life that feels completely broken, there comes a moment when reality becomes impossible to ignore. A moment when the consequences of old choices stand directly in front of you. And in that moment, a person must face something they've avoided for years. The kind of moment that forces a man to confront the truth about himself. At first, he believed the problems were temporary. Just a rough season, he told himself. Something that would pass if he worked harder. But as the days kept repeating themselves, a strange frustration began to grow. No matter how much effort he poured into his life, the results seemed stubbornly the same. It felt like trying to run forward while the ground beneath him slowly pulled him back. His mornings often began with a quiet promise to himself. Today will be different. Yet somehow, by evening, he found himself standing in the same place again. The same reactions, the same careless decisions, the same outcomes. And each repetition left him more confused than the last. He couldn't understand why the pattern refused to break. Sometimes he blamed bad luck, sometimes other people, sometimes circumstances. But deep down, there was a growing suspicion he tried not to face. What if the real problem wasn't the world around him? What if the problem lived much closer than that? Still, awareness didn't come easily. Habits have a quiet power that most people underestimate. They shape how we react before we even have time to think. They whisper familiar responses during moments of pressure or frustration. And before long, a person finds themselves repeating actions almost automatically. Take a simple moment, an argument, a financial decision, a stressful day. Instead of pausing, he reacted quickly, almost instinctively. Words came out sharper than he intended. Choices were made in emotion rather than clarity. And later, regret arrived like an unwanted guest who always knew where to find him. That cycle slowly drained something important from him. Confidence began to shrink. Hope started to feel fragile, like glass that might shatter with the next mistake. Even when new opportunities appeared, he hesitated longer than he used to, because past failures had taught him to expect the worst. If someone had watched him from the outside, they might have seen a man trying. He worked, he struggled, he kept moving, but inside, it felt like wandering through a maze with no exit. Every path seemed to loop back to the same disappointing place, and the longer it lasted, the more trapped he felt. But life has a curious way of interrupting patterns when we least expect it. Sometimes it sends a moment so sharp, so undeniable, that a person can no longer hide behind excuses or confusion. For this man, that moment was already approaching, and when it arrived, it would force him to face a truth he had avoided for years. For a long time, the man believed he could keep drifting like this, not improving, not collapsing completely, just surviving in the middle. But life rarely allows someone to stay in that gray zone forever. Eventually, the consequences of repeated choices begin to gather strength, and one day, they arrive all at once. His moment came on an evening that felt strangely ordinary. The sky outside was dim, the kind of quiet sunset that usually goes unnoticed. Yet inside his small apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. On the table sat a few unpaid bills, a phone that hadn't rung in days, and the lingering memory of a conversation that had just ended badly. Earlier that day, someone important had walked away from him, not out of anger this time, but out of exhaustion. They had tried again and again to believe he would change, but promises had been broken too many times, and eventually, even patience has limits. When the door closed behind them, something inside him shifted. For the first time, he couldn't blame circumstances or bad luck. The evidence was right there in front of him. The broken finances, the fractured relationships, the opportunities lost, they all traced back to the same place: him. That realization didn't arrive gently. It hit like a wave, sharp, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. He saw the pattern clearly now. The impulsive reactions, the careless choices, the moments where pride had spoken louder than wisdom. And suddenly the story he had been telling himself no longer made sense. He sat there for a long time that night, staring at nothing in particular, not angry, not distracted, just painfully aware. For once there was no noise, no excuses, no one else to blame. Only the quiet truth sitting across from him like an old mirror. And mirrors, when we finally look into them honestly, rarely lie. That moment hurt more than any failure he had experienced before. But strangely enough, it also carried something unexpected, because hidden inside the pain was a tiny spark of clarity. If his choices had built the life he was living, then maybe different choices could build something else. And with that uncomfortable thought lingering in his mind, the man realized something important about the road ahead. Running away from his problems had never helped him. Avoiding reflection had only kept him blind. Perhaps the first real step forward would require doing the opposite. That night didn't end with a dramatic breakthrough. There was no sudden burst of motivation, no heroic speech in the mirror, just a tired man sitting quietly in a dim room, thinking longer than he ever had before. For once, he wasn't trying to escape the discomfort. He stayed there with it, letting the truth settle in. And slowly, a different kind of thought began to form. Maybe the problem wasn't just the mistakes he made. Maybe the real problem was that he never stopped long enough to understand them. His life had always moved too fast. Reaction after reaction, decision after decision. There had never been a pause. That realization felt strangely simple, almost too simple to matter. But the longer he sat with it, the more it made sense. If a man never stops to examine his actions, how could he ever expect to change them? So he made a quiet decision that night, not a grand promise about fixing everything at once. He had tried that before, and it always collapsed under pressure. This time the commitment was smaller and much more deliberate. Each day he would stop and reflect. Just a few minutes, nothing complicated. 10 quiet minutes at the end of the day. 10 minutes to ask himself honest questions about how he had lived, what choices helped him move forward, and which ones quietly pulled him backward. It sounded almost insignificant. After all, 10 minutes hardly seems powerful enough to rebuild a life. But sometimes the smallest habits carry the deepest influence, especially when they force a person to face the truth consistently. And truth, once seen clearly, has a strange way of reshaping behavior. He imagined what those moments might look like, sitting somewhere quiet, maybe at the edge of his bed, maybe at the kitchen table. No distractions, no phone, no television humming in the background. Just a notebook, a few honest thoughts, and the courage to be real with himself. For the first time in years, the idea felt possible. Of course, a decision like that raises an interesting question. How exactly does someone reflect in a way that actually leads to change? What questions should be asked during those quiet minutes? What patterns should a person look for? And more importantly, could something this simple truly transform a broken life? Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More 2 Bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. A few days after making that quiet promise to himself, the man stumbled across something unexpected, not during some dramatic event, but in a moment most people would overlook. It happened while he was sitting alone in a small cafe, absent-mindedly reading an article someone had recommended. At first, the words seemed ordinary, just another piece about personal growth. But one idea in the middle of the page made him pause. The article described something simple yet powerful: It claimed that most people don't change their lives because they never examine their patterns. They repeat behaviors automatically, the same way a driver follows a familiar road without thinking. And unless someone deliberately stops to study those patterns, they remain invisible. That invisible repetition quietly becomes a person's destiny. The man leaned back in his chair, rereading that sentence slowly. It felt uncomfortably accurate. For years he had focused on fixing outcomes, money problems, arguments, missed chances. But he had rarely examined the chain of decisions that created those outcomes. He had been fighting the results, not the pattern. The article explained reflection in a way he had never heard before. Think of it like reviewing a game after it ends. Athletes don't improve just by playing, they improve by studying what happened during the game. Where did they hesitate? Where did they react too quickly? What move worked? And what mistake cost them the point? The idea clicked immediately. His life had been a long series of games he never reviewed. Each day ended, and he simply rushed into the next one. Mistakes stayed unexamined, lessons remained hidden, patterns stayed intact. And without realizing it, he kept repeating the same moves. The article suggested a simple practice anyone could follow. At the end of each day, ask 3 honest questions. What went well today? What mistake or reaction could I handle better next time? And what small adjustment will I make tomorrow? The man closed the article and stared out the cafe window for a while. For the first time, reflection didn't feel abstract or philosophical. It felt practical, like a tool he could actually use, a way to shine light on the hidden patterns that had quietly shaped his life. And if those patterns could be seen, perhaps they could finally be changed. Still, knowing an idea and applying it are 2 very different things. Understanding reflection was only the beginning. The real challenge would be turning that insight into a daily practice, a system simple enough to repeat, yet powerful enough to reshape his decisions. And that's where the real experiment in his life was about to begin. The next evening, the man decided to begin. No ceremony, no dramatic preparation, just a quiet start. He cleared a small space at the kitchen table and placed a simple notebook in front of him. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. For the first time in years, he intentionally paused his day. At first, he didn't know exactly what to write. His mind felt oddly blank, as if it wasn't used to being examined. But then he remembered the 3 questions from the article, so he wrote them slowly at the top of the page. What went well today? What mistake could I improve? What will I do differently tomorrow? The first answers were surprisingly simple. One small moment where he stayed calm during a stressful conversation. One careless reaction where frustration made him speak too quickly. One decision he wished he had handled with more patience. Seeing those moments written down felt strangely powerful. For the first time, his day wasn't just a blur of events. It was a sequence of choices he could actually study. Each action now looked like part of a pattern forming beneath the surface. Some patterns helped him move forward. Others quietly pulled him backward without him noticing. He realized reflection didn't require long hours of thinking. 10 honest minutes were enough to uncover something useful. Sometimes the lesson was obvious. Slow down before reacting. Other times it was subtle. Notice what situations trigger impatience or fear. But every night revealed a small piece of the puzzle. Soon he added one more habit to the process. At the bottom of the page, he wrote one simple intention for tomorrow. Not a huge life change, just one small adjustment. Pause before responding during difficult conversations. Think twice before spending money impulsively. This tiny system began giving his days a new sense of direction. Instead of drifting from event to event, he now ended each day with clarity. Mistakes were no longer vague regrets floating in his memory. They became lessons captured in ink, and lessons, once written, have a way of guiding future choices. Still, building a habit isn't always comfortable, especially one that forces a person to face their own behavior honestly, because the more he reflected, the more clearly he began to see himself, and some of those discoveries were harder to accept than he expected. The next few days would test his commitment in ways he hadn't anticipated. The first few nights of reflection felt heavier than he expected. Sitting quietly with a notebook sounds simple, until honesty enters the room. Without distractions, there was nowhere to hide from his own thoughts. Each page became a mirror, and mirrors rarely soften the truth. What he saw there wasn't always easy to accept. On the second night, he noticed something uncomfortable. Many of the problems in his day followed the same pattern. Impatience during stressful moments, quick reactions instead of calm responses, small decisions made without thinking about consequences. At first, his instinct was to defend himself. Anyone would react like that, he thought. It wasn't entirely my fault, but the quiet minutes had a strange effect on him. They slowly pushed him beyond excuses and closer to honesty. He began to see how often emotion guided his behavior. A careless purchase after a stressful afternoon, a sharp response during a conversation that didn't need conflict, avoiding responsibilities simply because they felt uncomfortable. Patterns he had lived with for years suddenly became visible. Some nights, writing those realizations felt almost painful. Nobody enjoys admitting their own mistakes on paper. Yet something surprising happened during those moments. Instead of feeling weaker, he felt clearer, because confusion loses its power once it's understood. The process also revealed something encouraging. Not every page was filled with failure. There were small victories hidden in his days, moments where he stayed patient, moments where he chose wisely. Reflection allowed him to see progress he might have ignored before. One evening, he noticed a pattern he had never seen clearly. Every time he felt overwhelmed, he rushed decisions. That single realization explained years of problems. Suddenly, the mistakes didn't feel random anymore. They had roots. And once you can see the roots of a problem, you finally gain the chance to change how it grows. The man didn't know it yet, but these difficult nights were slowly sharpening something inside him. Awareness. And awareness would soon begin changing the way he moved through each day. At first, the changes were almost invisible. No dramatic success, no sudden breakthrough that would impress anyone watching from the outside. His life still looked ordinary. Same job, same streets, same daily responsibilities. But inside his mind, something subtle had begun to shift. And sometimes the smallest internal shifts create the biggest external changes. Each night, the notebook filled with small observations. Patterns he had never noticed before started appearing again and again. Moments where stress made him impatient. Situations where fear pushed him to avoid responsibility. And surprisingly, moments where a little patience created a better outcome. The real difference began during the day, not just at night. Because once a person becomes aware of their patterns, those patterns start appearing in real time. Suddenly, he could feel the familiar urge to react too quickly. But now there was a tiny pause before the reaction. That pause was new. It lasted only a few seconds at first. Yet within those few seconds lived something powerful. Choice. Instead of automatically repeating the same behavior, he could briefly consider a better response. One afternoon at work, someone criticized him unfairly. The old version of him would have responded instantly, sharp and defensive. But that day, the notebook flashed through his mind. He paused, took a breath, and chose his words more carefully. The conversation ended differently than it usually did. It wasn't a huge victory, but it mattered, because that moment proved something important. Reflection wasn't just a quiet evening habit anymore. It was beginning to influence his behavior during the day. The lessons were traveling from the notebook into real life. Gradually, these tiny pauses began appearing more often. Before spending money impulsively, he hesitated. Before reacting emotionally, he questioned the impulse. Before avoiding a responsibility, he remembered the patterns he had written down. Each pause opened a new possibility. Of course, progress wasn't perfect. Some days he still fell back into old habits. Some pages in the notebook still carried frustration and regret. But something fundamental had changed. He was learning from those mistakes. And that learning was quietly preparing him for a moment he didn't expect. For weeks, the changes in the man's life had been quiet and almost invisible. Most people around him wouldn't have noticed anything different. After all, 10 minutes of reflection doesn't look dramatic from the outside. But beneath the surface, his awareness had been slowly sharpening day by day. And eventually, a moment arrived that proved something had truly changed. It happened during an ordinary afternoon that began like many others. Work had been stressful, patience was wearing thin, and frustration was building quietly inside him. Then a situation appeared that felt strangely familiar. A disagreement with a colleague, exactly the kind of moment that used to trigger his worst reactions. In the past, this would have ended badly. He felt the old impulse rising almost instantly. The urge to interrupt, defend himself, and escalate the tension. For a split second, his mind prepared to follow the same path it always had. But then something interesting happened. That small pause he had been practicing finally appeared. Inside that pause lived a memory. The pages of his notebook. the patterns he had written about so many nights before, the realization that impatience had ruined countless conversations, and suddenly he recognized the crossroads in front of him. This time, he chose differently. Instead of reacting, he listened. Instead of raising his voice, he slowed his words. Instead of defending his pride, he focused on solving the problem. And something surprising happened. The conversation didn't explode like it usually did. The tension eased instead of growing. What could have turned into conflict quietly transformed into cooperation. By the end of the discussion, the problem had actually been solved, and no one walked away angry. Later that evening, when he opened his notebook, his hand paused above the page, because for the first time, he wasn't writing about a mistake. He was writing about a decision he handled well, a moment where awareness had changed the outcome, a moment that proved something powerful. That single event might have looked small to anyone else, but to the man, it meant everything. It showed him that the cycle of old mistakes was not permanent, that patterns could be interrupted, and that realization quietly opened the door to a much bigger transformation. Weeks slowly turned into months, and the small ritual at the end of each day never disappeared. Some nights the notebook filled with lessons, other nights with quiet victories. But what mattered most was the consistency, the simple act of stopping and looking honestly at his life, 10 minutes every evening, like a quiet checkpoint on the road of his days. And little by little, the man who once felt broken began to look different. Not overnight. Real transformation rarely arrives with fireworks. Instead, it shows up quietly in the way someone handles a stressful moment, in the patience they show during a difficult conversation, in the thoughtful pause before making a decision. His reactions became calmer. Situations that once triggered frustration now invited reflection instead. He no longer rushed through problems blindly. He examined them the way someone studies a map before choosing a path. That small habit of awareness slowly reshaped his daily behavior. People around him started noticing subtle changes. Conversations with him felt steadier, less defensive. He listened more carefully, spoke more deliberately. Even his work began improving as his decisions became clearer. The man who once reacted impulsively now acted with intention. The notebook itself became a record of growth. Early pages were filled with repeated mistakes and confusion, but later pages told a different story. Fewer regrets, more thoughtful choices, and a growing sense that he was finally steering his own life. Financial habits improved because he questioned impulsive spending. Relationships strengthened because he paused before speaking in anger. Opportunities appeared because he approached decisions with patience. None of these changes came from luck. They came from understanding himself. Reflection had quietly become his compass. Each evening he checked his direction, corrected small errors, and prepared for tomorrow. And just like a ship adjusting its course by a few degrees each day, his life slowly drifted away from the storms he once created, toward something steadier. If someone had met him a year earlier, they might not recognize him now. The same man stood there, yet something fundamental had changed. He wasn't perfect, no one ever is, but he had become wiser, calmer, more intentional with every choice, all because he learned the courage to pause and look inward. If someone had asked the man what truly changed his life, he might have surprised them with the answer. Not a new job, not a lucky break, not a sudden burst of motivation. The real turning point was far quieter than that. It was the moment he learned to pause. You see, most people believe change begins with massive action. Work harder, move faster, push through problems with more force. But the man discovered something different along his journey. Sometimes the most powerful step forward begins with stillness, with a moment of honest reflection. Because when you stop long enough to examine your choices, patterns that once controlled you start becoming visible. The impulsive reactions, the hidden habits, the quiet decisions that shape your future. Without reflection, those patterns stay invisible. And invisible patterns are incredibly difficult to change. But once they are seen, something remarkable happens. Awareness creates space between impulse and action, and inside that space lives your power to choose differently. A calmer word instead of a harsh reaction. A thoughtful decision instead of an automatic mistake. Anyone watching this story can begin the same process tonight. Not with a complicated system or hours of analysis, just 10 quiet minutes at the end of the day. Ask yourself 3 honest questions. What went well? What could improve? And what will I do differently tomorrow? Write the answers down. Even a few short sentences can reveal more than you expect. Over time, those pages will begin to show the patterns shaping your life. And once you see those patterns clearly, you gain the power to redirect them. Because the truth is this: your future is rarely built in dramatic moments. It's built quietly through repeated choices. And those choices become wiser the moment you begin examining them, one honest reflection at a time. And somewhere out there, another person may already be sitting quietly tonight, thinking about the direction of their own life, wondering if change is still possible after so many mistakes. Perhaps the same realization is waiting for them: the simple courage to pause and finally understand themselves.